Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Translation Odysseys, Life as a Literary Translator. My name is Barbara Ofosu-Somuah. I am a translator from Italian to English, and tonight I'm really excited to host a conversation with Yarri Kamara, Elena Pala, and Shaun Whiteside as they share their personal journeys working between Italian and English. I want to thank this is part of the BCLT Italian-English Advanced Writing Workshop, Translation Workshop, which is in partnership with BCLT and the Italian Cultural Partnership. And I would like to thank our sponsors, the Italian Cultural Institute, the British Center for Literary Translation, and the National Center for Writing. The conversation is going to go as follows. I will be asking a series of questions of our panelists, questions that we've kind of been workshopping together for a while. They'll talk about what brought them to translation, what excites them about translation, what keeps them going. And then we'll open up to Q&A. And so for folks who are attending, I encourage you to use the Q&A option in Zoom to ask your questions as they come up. And at a certain point in the conversation, I will open it up so that you can ask your questions and that the panelists are able to answer it for you. So yeah, thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much again to our sponsors for joining us on this. I'm going to start with our first question for the panelists, and folks can turn on your videos if you're ready. Elena, Shaun, and Yarri.
Hello.
Hi. Good evening, or good. I keep saying good evening, but I'm actually in a quite sunny 2 p.m. in the afternoon, Durham, North Carolina. Where are you all calling in from?
I am in very, very dark 7 p.m. Edinburgh, United Kingdom.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm in Milan, so 1 hour ahead of Edinburgh.
I'm in temporary accommodation in an eco cabin on Tooting Bec Common in South London.
South London. So you can probably see the sun shining really broadly on my forehead here. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you I still consider myself an emerging translator and participate in BCLT in the prose workshop with Daniel Hahn about 2 years ago. And so it's really exciting to be on this side, to be having conversations with folks whose work I've read, whose work has inspired me as I continue to develop as a translator. And so the first question I have for all of you is, if you would could you share a little bit about what drew you to literary translation? Maybe it's a specific book, an author, perhaps it's because you grew up already multilingual and you're excited to sort of lengthen that project through translation. Elena, I'll start with you because I see you first on my screen.
Oh, great. Languages have always been my thing, I guess. I was always good at them in school. It always came naturally to me. Studied them at university. I also loved books, but somehow it didn't really occur to me to put two and two together until much later in my career. So my academic background is actually linguistics. I then did the first of many 180s in my career and decided that academia wasn't for me, and I went to work in advertising. But I don't know, I just had that call to do something different. And whilst I continue to work in marketing to pay those pesky bills, during a sabbatical that I took traveling in South America, as any millennial is bound to do at some point in their life, I just fell in love with languages even more so again when I kind of picked up Spanish in my travels. And when I came back to the UK, I decided to look into translation, and specifically literary translation, because I wanted to marry my love for books and my love for languages. And I remember taking myself to the London Book Fair, knowing absolutely nothing about the industry, because I'd heard that that was the place to be. I remember joining the ETN, Emerging Translators Network, and reading all the emails. And then I applied for the BCLT summer translation school That was back in 2019, July 2019. So like the last kind of like pre-pandemic one. And it was there that my journey started in earnest with Shaun, who was my workshop coordinator for Italian, and Clarissa as well, who joined us because we were working on a novel by Elvira Donis, and Clarissa had translated not that specific one, but others by Elvira. So we were very lucky not just to have an author to work with us, but also a very experienced translator. So that's about the background. And I don't know if we want to talk about what happened later, or maybe just what got me into it.
Yeah, we can start with everyone telling us how they got
Okay.
started, and then we can work our way through where we are now. What about you, Yarri?
Yeah, so a little bit like Elena, I always was drawn to languages. I studied French language and literature at university in the US. But for many years, I didn't think about literary translation at all. I used to do technical translations just because I liked playing around with languages. I had and I still do have a main career as a cultural policy researcher, but I kept doing technical translations because I like the game of languages. And then prior to coming to Milan, I lived in Burkina Faso for 17 years. So I was reading a lot of Francophone West African literature. And I guess there were two observations that drove me to say, well, maybe I should actually try my hand at translation. One, I was reading a lot of the Francophone West African literature in French, but every once in a while I'd pick up English translations, and often they left me very unsatisfied. A lot of them were done, you know, in the 60s, 70s. African literature was still just being discovered by global readers, let's say. But for instance, the Senegalese classic Ousmane Sembène's God's Bits of Wood, I think that struck me the most because I'd just seen a play version of it. So I had, you know, I had the sound of the sound and the vocabulary of the original French in my head, and then I picked up the English version, and there are some things that were just missing in some of the local context that had been flattened in the English version that was available. So that got me thinking about, well, you know, what's happening with some of these pieces of African literature when they get translated? How much of the local context gets flattened out, either because perhaps the translator is too removed from that context, or also just because publishing houses, especially, you know, 30, 40 years ago, had in mind one kind of reader who was based in the West. And so they maybe thought, you know, well, we don't need these details that a West African reader might pick up. So yeah, there was a sort of dissatisfaction with some of the English translations available of some works that I was familiar with. And then there was also the observation that there were so many like brilliant works of Francophone African literature that just were not available in English. And a lot of these really well known in the French speaking countries in West Africa, and just no clue about them. You know, I'm of Anglophone origins, Sierra Leone and Uganda, and I also grew up in Kenya. And you know, my family living in Kenya had no clue about these works, but they're fundamental parts of West African literature. So yeah, so this gap, and I said, well, you know, I do have experience as a translator, given I came from the technical side. And around 2018, 2019, I also started writing my own personal projects. And I think, you know, that sort of coincided, you know, writing my own stuff, and then literary translating is a form of writing. It's supremely a form of writing. So I think that's when around 2019, that's when I took the jump. I came across a Burkinabe novel that I really liked. And I said, well, okay, here's my chance to jump in and try to render into English this West African work in French in a way that I think does justice to the local context.
That's great. It's this talk about Odyssey. Both of you literally went on journeys. You mentioned living and traveling into different places and that bringing you eventually to the decision to translate. Shaun, what about you?
I think we all go on an odyssey towards this. Although I've seen the landscape, I think, completely transformed over the last X number of decades since I began. Because really there wasn't a framework for becoming a literary translator. It wasn't really a thing. It was a niche thing that was off there that people didn't necessarily want to do in those days. And I studied languages. I studied French and German at university. And having toyed with the idea of academia, I got a job as a business journalist. This was the 1980s, and there would be advertisements in the papers saying language graduates wanted, with a remarkably high salary underneath, and we all applied and we all got it. And then we phoned up traders every day and we wrote down numbers. And after a certain point, I thought, I'm not sure this is really going anywhere. I went to a conference of shipping brokers in Hamburg, and there were grown men standing on the tables throwing radishes at each other. And these days I might get up and join in, but at that point I thought, I don't think this is my world, really. So I saw a job advertised for a multilingual lexicographer, and I became a lexicographer for a year before the project was actually closed down. And I thought, these are actually my people. These are translators. They're fantastic. I hadn't realized it was a thing you could actually do. I had also translated throughout all that period. I had friends who were in academia, and they said, could you translate this paper for me? And I would. And I thought, I actually enjoy this. This is fun. So I kept going. I was a lexicographer. I also got a part-time job at the same time translating for Macmillan's Art Dictionary. So that was my weekends taken care of. And I took evening classes in Italian because I'd fallen in love with Italy. And by chance, I happened upon somebody who knew some people in Faber and Faber. Now, you can't rely on that happening. You can't rely on just happening to meet somebody. You've got to make those connections yourself. And he said, they need a German reader. And I said, what's that? And he said, that's somebody who reads German books and they can decide whether they're going to publish them or not. So I said, oh boy, that sounds interesting. And after reviewing 2 or 3 books, I was offered my first book to translate. And it was a collection of essays by the filmmaker Wim Wenders. And I was absolutely over the moon. This was so exciting. This was so much more exciting than anything I'd ever done. So I set up my Amstrad in the middle of my bedsit. I don't know if anybody remembers those. And off we went, and it kind of took off from there. And I thought, this is great. I'd made contact with a guy called Martin Chalmers, who was a great German translator, and we became terrific mates. And I think he really acted as my mentor. And I thought, yeah, I've become part of the translation world. And it took off from there. And then I was offered Italian books, because in those days there were very few translators from Italian into English. So I happened in there, I think, at a very good time. And that was the beginning.
That's so interesting. And it sounds also just like the generational shifts of how and when we came to translation, each of us also determines like our access to translation, whether we were asked to translate or we chose to, what need drew us to it. As you think about, I'm curious about sort of when you reflect back on your first project, right? Your first translation project, whatever it is that it was. When you think about it now, years later, or however long since then, how do you feel about it now? Do you feel as if like you would change something, or what do you reflect on that project, even though it was the thing that opened up this world to you in some ways? And maybe for Yarri, because you were going between technical and literary, thinking specifically about your first literary translation project.
I wish they'd spelled my name right on that book, but anyway.
Did you get your name on the cover?
No, on the title page.
Okay.
Never mind.
No, that's important. It's important.
Did they misspell your first name or your last name, Shaun?
My first name.
Oh dear.
With a W?
No, S-E-A-N.
Oh.
Which is fine.
Oh, they made you Scottish.
They made you Scottish.
Properly Irish, in fact. But...
What about you, Yarri?
Yeah, so my first book was that Burkinabe novel, So Distant from My Life by Monique Ilboudeau. And I think maybe because I'd waited so long to do my first literary translation, it went really well. It went really well, and I think it was just really exciting once it did get published. It was picked up by Tilted Access Press, so a UK publishing house, and just seeing how much the book was able to travel in its English version, just because, the English language is read in so many parts of the world. It's not just the UK and the US, but there's the Indian market, there's New Zealand, Australia, there's the Anglophone African market. And before So Distant from My Life, there had only been one other novel from Burkina Faso translated into English, Norbert Zongo's The Parachute Drop in the 90s. So because it was available in English, the book was picked up by a lot of, read around the world book clubs, and just people curious about Burkina Faso, that they reach out to that novel because it's one of the few works of fiction available to people who don't read French. Yeah, so I think I was really lucky, because it's like the biggest reward you can give to a translator, to see how you actually help the book travel. Not only that you managed to render it into an English that people enjoyed. So it did get shortlisted for the US National Translation in Prose Award. So I think I did a pretty decent job. Yeah, but just giving wings to a book to fly to new regions.
That's amazing. That's really cool. What about you, Elena?
What would I change about my first project? Absolutely nothing. It was it was magical in every respect. First of all, how it came to me. I just finished the summer school, and I had then applied and got the Emergent Translator mentorship with Howard Curtis, whom I've also spied in the attendees list. Hi Howard. And halfway through that, I think I was approached by the lovely Federico Andornino, who at the time was at WNN, I think. And I was asked if I wanted to do a sample for a novel he'd just acquired by a very little known author called Sandro Veronesi, and I just couldn't believe it. And by the way, credit where credit's due, that was the work or the recommendation of the man without whom absolutely nothing happens in literary translation, i.e. Danny Han, and also Shaun. So I first of all blessed to even be asked, and then obviously even more over the moon when they liked the sample and got me my first contract. And then also the fact that it came at a very special time for me. I was 9 months pregnant when I was signing that contract. And so I ended up translating the book during my maternity leave, which also coincided with the height of COVID, and my son was born 2 weeks before the first lockdown. So it was a crazy time, and I think having that kept me sane. So it was such a blessing in so many ways. And then halfway through translating it, it won the Strega, which is, you all know what a Strega is. I'm used to always saying like the Strega, which is the Italian equivalent of the Booker, but you all know.
The one audience.
Yeah, exactly. I forget this is an audience of Italian translators, which, it just felt like, again, blessings upon blessings. And then it was very well received, both in the UK, and when they sold the rights to the US, I got to work with the Harper Via people, editors and publishers, who are amongst the most like delightful, and I formed a very good relationship with them, which then led to another book, and it was then adapted into a radio play for BBC Radio 3. So I got to kind of like do an event at the Edinburgh Book Festival that year, kind of like co-presenting that. And yeah, 2 years after it was published, I remember still wandering into my favorite bookshop in Edinburgh, Toppings, if anyone is local, and still seeing a copy of it on the shelves, which again, so no, that is, in fact, that is perfect. If I could get like 10 more of that, yes, please.
That's awesome. Shaun, besides the name, is there something about your first translation project that you that you want to reflect on, or how do you feel about it now?
I think it linked in with a bunch of other things that I was interested in. So it brought me for a time into the film world in a funny sort of way, because I worked with an editor called Walter Donoghue, who edited various film journals for Faber and Faber, and they often required translations. So I was doing this really interesting stuff in a field that I was very, very interested in. But it was only later, a couple of years later, that I started working more in literature. I was offered my first classic to do, which was a book by Nietzsche, and that was incredibly exciting. The Birth of Tragedy for Penguin Classics. And from there worked for a publisher that's now no longer exists, called Quartet, which had a very mercurial editor called Stephen Pickles, who was rather terrifying. You would sometimes see him propping up the bar in the Coach and Horses pub in Soho. And I learned after a couple of attempts never to approach him when he was propping up the bar in the Coach and Horses, only ever in his office. And he was a kind of genius maverick publisher. And I translated books for him from German, including one by Marlene Haushofer called The Wall, which kind of disappeared for 30 years and now has been republished by New Directions. So I'm now translating lots and lots of books. I may be preempting in one of your next questions by Marlene Haushofer, because there are lots that haven't been translated or haven't been translated for a long time. So yes, it opened up paths. It all opened up paths. At a time when this still seemed like a very minority thing to do. It seemed exciting, it seemed pioneering. And yeah, I felt like I was at the start of something.
It's so interesting, because you did preempt a question, and I think it's great that you did actually. This question around kind of how do you choose your projects, right? Or how are they chosen for you? And most of you've all three kind of hinted at that, right? Particularly with your first projects, whether it came to you through an ask or it came to you because you felt like there was a gap or a need that needed to be filled. I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about choosing projects right now. Shaun, you're mentioning that there is an author who has a a lot that hasn't been translated perhaps. So like that becomes sort of the project. Or if it's you're choosing projects because they align with your values or your interests. For those of you who are translating across multiple languages too, what maybe are you thinking I need to focus more on this language for now, and then I'll transition to this other language. Yeah, so what brings you to the projects that you're working on? Yarri, you have a smile.
Yeah, sure, I'll jump in. Sorry, I had some internet issues and I dropped out
you
for a
didn't miss
couple of
very
minutes.
much.
But I think it's stabilized again. Yeah, for now, I honestly, I haven't had anyone knocking on my door offering me a translation, a literary translation. Well, no, I had one request that didn't work out because the project was axed by the publishing house. But otherwise, it's me picking work that speaks to me. And it's only been 3 years since I left Burkina Faso, let's say the wider Sahel region. So I'm still very much in that phase of, what can I do to get the literature from that region better known to the world. So after my first project, So Distant from My Life, I worked on 2 classics of Francophone West African literature, which for me are like hidden gems, or, they're hiding in plain sight because they're actually pretty well known in the French-speaking countries. So one's a play by the Malian playwright Massa Makanjabate, Une Hyène Jeune, which could be translated a ravenous hyena. My working title is more Samary's Choice. So this historical figure, Samary Touré. And it's really a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions. And it's beyond me why it's not translated into English. Well, yeah, so I worked on that. And then another classic of historical fiction from Niger, Sarawunia, by Abdoulaye Mamani, that was made into a film in the 1980s that won one of Africa's biggest film awards, but again, unknown to the English world. So yeah, I'm still in that phase of like Sahel, West African French literature, but I live in Italy now. There's a lot of Italian literature that I love. Yeah, but I think I'm sort of getting through that backlog, and then I'll maybe in a couple of years turn my eye towards Italian literature, maybe Italian literature that has a link to the African continent. I read the fascinating memoirs written in Italian by Ethiopian princess Marta Nasibu, Memoria di una principessa Etiopia. Which I know a US publisher has, a US translator, I forget his name now, has translated, but he still hasn't found a publisher for. Yeah, so I think yeah.
I think Aaron Robertson may be translating that one. Pretty cool.
Yeah, so I'm picking my passion projects for now.
Yeah. Elena and Shaun, I really appreciate sort of the distinction between, choosing the work because it calls to you, right? Because there's a space that needs to be filled. And often, some of us are doing that, and others are also, getting called to do samples that then transition into other things as well. Do you want to speak to that, Elena? You're muted.
Apologies. So it's I'm always so like fascinated and in awe of people who are kind of like, first of all, who have like made it their passion to kind of like really dedicate their craft to emerging or surfacing lesser known kind of like literatures for the whole world to consume and enjoy. My experience has been very different in that, partly as a consequence of me always having had full-time jobs alongside literary translation, and also partly as a consequence of how things came to me. I haven't pitched anything to publishers. The novels that I've translated, I haven't chosen any of them. I've been very, very grateful that they came to me in the first place, and it has happened organically by word of mouth from working with publishers and editors who where I was either put in touch with or had worked with before. I would love to perhaps have a bit more space and time in my life. I guess sometimes it's also a function of your personal circumstances. I know of many translators who are phenomenal at uncovering gems and championing them and finding publishers for them. Antonella Lettieri, I'm looking at you. I know you're lurking in there. And many others. For me, as I said, it's been, I mean, you can, look at it both ways. I've been both incredibly lucky that since my first book contract, it all kind of like came organically from there. The flip side to that is that due to my kind of like financial commitment to my day job, I've only been able to do about a book a year since I started in 2020. So I've got one just coming out now in 2026. I don't know exactly when publication date hasn't been set, but again, I've been extremely lucky in it being an author that I admired, and it's a novel set in the town, which is practically the town I was born in, Rimini. So I think by some, I don't know, benevolent design, I was lucky to always work with authors and on projects that I respected, but I can't really claim any agency in that. I wish I could speak more and with equal passion as Yarri to this, but the plain truth is this, and part of the Odyssey is obviously it would be my greatest wish for this to be my main or even my sole mode of earning a living. I'm also quite jealous of Shaun's beginnings at a time when perhaps we didn't have to compete with machines as well as people.
But well, we'll come to that one, I think.
Yeah, well, yes, definitely, I'm sure.
But you can take us.
Question.
You can take us there, Shaun, if you want to. Like, if you that feels, we can have the conversation.
I'd rather come to that a bit later, I think.
Okay,
this is
okay.
in the discussion. I'm very interested about what Elena says there about the works being chosen by the publishers, because that's always been pretty much how I've operated as well, is that I've relied on friendships, usually friendships with editors who knew what they were talking about and followed their advice. But having said that, it's something that I would very much like to do, is to discover either neglected writers or writers from obscure corners of the countries of the language that I translate from. I would love to find something unknown and make it a huge success. I think that's what we really want to do, I think, is to discover, like, as Yarri's been saying, is to discover something that's been neglected unfairly and bring it into the light. So yeah, I'd still love to do that.
I'm going to take us there because it feels appropriate. The question of AI, which is haunting so much of our industry and the work that we're doing right now. And you see, of course, like op-eds and this Anthropic right now, where the people are realizing that even though they had signed copyrights with publishers, publishers were not filing the copyrights, etc. And so their books, the works that they have produced as translators have been, fed through AI. But then also many publishers may be seeking to turn to AI because there's not a clear understanding of the work that it takes to go into translation. Yarri, you talked about reading works in translation and realizing that perhaps there isn't a connection or an effective relationship to the place, and that getting lost in the translation project as well. So I want to ask you all, how do you see AI affecting literary translation now, but also in the future, as the advent of AI is still quite young, but it's grown so rapidly. And let's start there. And then I would also I'm interested in if there are ways that you find yourself using technology, not necessarily AI, but technology generally in your work, and in your practice, or whether you avoid it altogether.
I don't use it at all, never have.
Okay.
Beyond looking things up on Google, I just don't. I have no idea how it's going to affect literary translation. I'm not convinced that it's affecting literary translation very much at the moment. One company unwisely used copyright material illegally and now faces an enormous bill. I don't know if you know about this. And check it out, Elena, because if your work has been used by this company, you will be eligible for a huge refund. So I'm not sure it's happening yet. I'm not convinced that it's happening yet. I see that there are some travel books, for example, that appear to have been written entirely by artificial intelligence, but I'm not sure that it's being used for literary translation. Does anybody have any experience of this?
Well,
Go on.
Yarri, do you want to go first?
Go ahead, Elena.
So I haven't heard yet of any UK or US or Australian or anyway Anglophone publisher who have been so brazen as to translate an entire book using AI. However, reports in the industry are rife of AI translations being used in blurbs or in kind of in marketing material, for instance, for book fairs. So rather than relying on translators to translate a sample and or a blurb, the use of AI for that, or even the use of AI as a blunt instrument, and then kind of a little bit of editing, to smooth
post editing, as they call it. Yeah,
exactly, post editing. And so perhaps not quite there in literary translation. When it comes to commercial translation or anything else, I work in marketing. I'm a content manager. For my day job, I am made to use AI quite a lot, just for the amount of content that I have to digest and churn out at the same time. And I have to tell you, it's scary how good it can be. At the end of the day, it all sounds a bit samey, obviously, but if you refine the prompt, the finished product that you get could be kind of 80% that. No, I don't use it for translation at all. I don't operate that, but for kind of content digestion, so to speak, kind of summarize me this article in 4 sentences, or what are the key insights, or also some ideas for what are some ideas for kind of social media post based on these 5 articles. It can be very good. most scarily of all, a couple of days ago, a friend of mine who is doing her PhD in Italian and French, she sent me an abstract for a paper she was submitting, and the abstract had to be available in English as well. And she said, I fed it to ChatGPT originally in Italian, but I'm sure it's going to be a dog's dinner. Can you have a look at it, please? And I had a look at it, and a dog dinner it was not.
This is the worrying thing. It's too good. I know.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say it was 90% there. I changed very little.
Yeah.
And this is an academic paper. And it was quite lengthy abstract, about 300 words. So it wasn't like, because it used to be the case, you know, on Google Translate, it was pretty good at translating a word or a phrase, but the moment you fed it a paragraph, a sentence or a paragraph, you know, the longer the text, the opportunity for error was obviously increasing exponential. Not anymore. So yes, it's, I guess
I think Danny Hahn somewhere described himself as a large language model, and I think actually,
which he is,
to an extent, that's what we are, isn't it? So potentially, of course, it could be devastating. I hope that for now, publishers obviously will keep their use of it to an absolute minimum, and respect us as artists and respect us as human beings with a voice. I don't know how long that will hold, and I can't begin to guess. But for now, by and large, I think that's the relationship. I see some notes saying that, yes, samples, etc., are being already translated by ChatGPT, and I'm sure that's true.
Yarri,
yeah, I don't have any direct observations to make, because, you know, my literary translation work is a little bit in my own bubble. But in terms of observing what's going on in other creative sectors, and for instance, I'm working a little bit on the music industry policy in Africa. And, you know, there's this tension, this pressure from who's producing, who's putting out the money to reduce costs. So their albums being generated almost 100% by AI in Nigeria, because it's a fifth of the cost.
Yeah.
So I think
music albums, yeah.
Yeah, the publishing houses will be putting the pressure, and they'll be looking for the kinds of literary works that can be done by AI. So it won't be all works that are adapted, but I think, you know, some of the literary translation work will go. But then there might be a backlash. You know, a lot of translators and technical translations had their work drastically fall or completely disappear, but some of them then are starting to see clients coming back, because clients are they're realizing they're not satisfied with the quality of the AI output. So there might be this fall, or, you know, literary work going to AI, and then a backlash where there's a return to human translation. And then I think also in terms of certain geographies and dialects, you know, depending on how, certainly thinking of African idioms and African dialects, within the language models that are training AI, African content is so marginalized that AI is never going to do a good job of translating African literature that uses a lot of local references. And I think it can be the same with some Italian dialects. If AI has not been trained on those models, then it's going to botch that up. So that there's going to be niches that will remain human-centered. Yeah, but I think, yeah, it's hard to tell. It's really hard to tell.
That's very true. And I think another aspect of you know, what my bias a stay of execution of another, I don't know, 10-15 years until the tools become really, really good, is that AI, I don't know about AI, again, translated content, because I've never used it for translation, but kind of like AI authored, so to speak, content, all sounds the same. Whereas in literature, voice for an author is paramount. So I'm not convinced that that would fly just yet. Again, maybe it's a matter of time. So that's something else we've got going for ourselves.
Yeah. There's like the Odyssey continues, I guess,
Exactly.
as all the technology gets introduced as well. I'm going to open up to the Q&A. We have some questions that we wanted to work on, but folks have been asking some questions, and I want to make sure that we give them a chance we give y'all a chance to answer them as well. H. Smith is asking for Yarri, but also for everybody else who is doing, if you're working as both a writer working on your own projects and doing translation, you've kind of alluded a little bit to this, Elena, in balancing your professional work and your translation. Yarri, introducing more of your own creative practice into your translation as well. The question is, they're interested in hearing more about combining these two things together and what you think they give to each other. What does writing give to your translation? What does translation give to your writing? Open it up, whoever wants to answer first.
That's a really, sorry, Yarri.
No, Shaun, go ahead.
Okay, that's a really interesting question. I don't do that much writing, but I do some reviewing. And it's a very different way of shaping your own sentences is not the same as shaping somebody else's sentences, but the two feed into each other. You learn from the cadences of both, I think, and you learn from the choices of register and vocabulary. I think writing your own stuff alerts you to choices that the writers you translate have made.
Yeah, absolutely, Shaun. And I think because I'm a self-taught translator, I don't think I would have gone into literary translation if I wasn't also writing my own stuff. It gave me that confidence to know that, I do have this attention to language, and therefore I can take on the responsibility to render someone else's work in fiction. And then what I do really enjoy about combining the two is I write in different genres than I translate. So I actually write mostly essays and poetry. Whereas in terms of literary projects that I choose, I go for fiction because I enjoy putting myself in the eyes of a fiction writer, but without, having to come up with my own plot. When I do have my own writing projects, I prefer to go more like the reflective essay route or the poetry route. Yeah, but I do really enjoy how the two feed into each other. One danger is, when you're suffering from writer's block, it's so easy to just jump onto a translation project because it's writer's block is much less painful when you're translating someone's work than your own writing block on your own.
Yes.
There's a question for you, Yarri, kind of thinking a little bit more about that. Well, in your work as a translator, because of the three folks here, you're the person, you're pitching your own projects to publishers. And because many of the people in the audience are emerging translators themselves, they're curious about that process of pitching. How are you finding the publisher? How are you look so excited to answer this question.
I find it exhausting.
Yeah.
It's almost as much work as the translating. It's almost as much. And I think, also because the English language world is so close to translation compared to other geographies. No, I think the percentage of books in translation in the Italian market is close to 20%, whereas in the UK or the US, it's like 3%. And then, I started sort of out of the blue, so I had no network. But it was a learning process for me. I think it's a good exercise, writing the synopsis. It gets you looking at the work that you fell in love with, maybe for other reasons in a different eye. But I have to say, I recently signed with a literary agent, and I am so happy because
Well done.
they're going to be pitching for me now.
Well done.
Yeah, so I'm relieved. I mean, I realize that the way the English language publishing market works, whether, it's not just UK, US, it's the same thing. I don't know. I've pitched things to Nigerian publishers. I'm thinking of pitching things to publishers in Kenya. It takes a lot of time. It's time
Can you speak to
consuming.
if you all other people have agents too, could you speak a little bit? I'm sure there's curiosity in the audience about maybe finding an agent or going through that process versus like, what is that like?
I only know
Find
one.
you?
I only know one translator who does have an agent, and I think it's a mixed blessing. I think because obviously you have to pay your 10%, but you don't have to do the pitching, so it's swings and roundabouts, I suppose. But it's not a route that many translators go down, I think, for that reason. I think you lose a certain amount of contact with the publisher by having an intermediary. I think.
I didn't even know that it was an option for translators to have agents. So by all means, I mean, I guess it depends if the volume they bring in then kind of like justifies their parting with the 10%. Then I would be open to it, especially because God knows, with a full-time job and as a single mother, I have precious little time for pitching. So I guess why not?
Did the agent find you, Yarri, or did you seek that out as part of your?
Yeah, no, the agent found me because I did an interview with a Sierra Leonean literary magazine that was online, and I was talking about the importance of translation in African literature, and she reached out to me after she read my interview. Yeah, I guess it also helped, that I have my own writing projects as well as translation, so it's not just works in translation.
That's awesome. I'm so happy to hear that, because the pitching process is really quite difficult. I know I've been working on a couple of translation projects myself, and just getting to that place of putting together the packet feels so overwhelming to me that even though I've seen samples before and I know what goes into it, but the like finding email addresses, sending things out feels so, or even like the fear of being rejected, right? I think sometimes also stops people from even making that leap as well. So I'm excited. There are folks who are asking about trans poetry. If are any of you, Yarri, you mentioned that you write poetry, but I'm not sure folks are interested in wanting to know if any of you are translators of poetry, and if you are, how that might differ from prose translation.
So it's strange.
But I know someone who can point you in the right direction, so I can. I don't know that she'll be happy to, but I can secretly tell you who she is.
Gotcha.
It's something I'd love to do. I think it's on a completely different level from translating prose. I think you've got to have a special kind of room in your head where the metaphysical thing happens between idea and word. And it's something I would happily look into, but not something I've really done yet. There is that thing that happens sometimes if you're doing a non-fiction book and you turn a page and there's 3 pages of poetry that you've suddenly got to translate. It does happen. And you just grit your teeth and get on with it. But I think it's a special knack. I think it's a special gift. And I think you have to be a bit of a poet yourself, like Yarri, to do it. Wouldn't rule it out though.
Yeah, and I write my own poetry, but I generally shy away from translating other people's poetry. Just I guess because it's tough. It's tough, and I think if I ever saw my poetry in translation, I think I would be a very tough judge. So and understandably so. So yeah, when I was starting out as a literary translator, there was a magazine in the US that reached out to me asking me to propose some poetry in translation from an African country. So that was my only attempt, and I haven't attempted poetry since then.
It's like you have to think about form, you have to think about structure, you have to think about
Yeah.
rhyme and rhythm,
Yeah.
all the different things. And
Yeah.
also I think about Italian. I'm working on this translation project, which is a poetry one, and I find it so difficult because Italian uses just way more words. And there's something about, in prose, it's fine, you can adjust as necessary, but with poetry, it feels like there's parts of that makes it quite difficult to render it legible poetically in English, maintaining structure or not, and then what decisions you can make about breaking that structure altogether or not. Folks are asking about if you all could talk a little bit more about advice for emergent translators, people who are starting out right now. How should they go about kind of beginning in the field and starting to translate or pitch or etc. Connect with mentors even.
Try and match up with independent publishers who are doing something you're very interested in. Find people who speak the same language, obviously I don't mean that, who think in similar terms to you about the kind of literature that they're going to find interesting. Find rapport with publishers and take it from there, I think. Bring them projects.
I think that's brilliant advice. And I was also going to say, if you are here, you're already doing something right. My main piece of advice would be to be around other translators and publishers and editors, take part in as many events, online or in person as you can, kind of like immerse yourself, marinate in, because I think, then naturally something's bound to, bump into you. You're bound to bump into something or someone, a project you'll hear about, or that's how it happened for me. And cultivate relationships. I hate the term networking, I hate it, but much in the way that Shaun just said, like, cultivate a rapport with like-minded people, and translators are among the nicest people I've ever met. Everything I got to do in this industry has been frankly through word of mouth from other translators and editors, not just the books, but also being a mentor or speaking in panels. It's all down to cultivating those very meaningful relationship with fellow translators. I can't speak to pitching at all, so maybe Yarri, if you want to take the lead on that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm not sure I'd give any advice based on my experience, because I think my experience is a little bit of an outlier. And I would probably, if I could change things in how I started out, I probably would have started reaching out for a network, for building relationships earlier. I think I worked in isolation perhaps for too long. One of it was partly because I was based in Burkina Faso, where there weren't many literary translators, so I had no community to reach out to. And then when I moved to Italy, I was still in that phase of focusing on African literature, but certainly across different African countries, that community of literary translators is starting to grow. Yeah, so whatever geography of literature you specialize in, seek a community. Yeah, in terms of pitching, a lot of what Shaun said, understand the publishing houses, understand which ones have the same interests, same vibes as you, make a list of their pitching windows, when are they open to receive submissions. Yeah, pay attention to what they don't accept. There's so many publishing houses that don't accept plays, so it's a bit of a waste of time to send them things that they don't accept. Yeah, I guess that's my few pieces of advice.
And when you translate, most of you, if I'm correct in this assumption, I'm seeing Yarri, you're working in French and Italian. Shaun is working in Italian, French, German, Dutch. Elena, you're working in Italian and French. So you're all doing multiple language simultaneously. So a question coming from the audience is, when you translate for more than one language, how do you manage to keep on top of the trends of each individual kind of like language strand, perhaps publisher strand, right? Do you recommend specializing in one particular language versus kind of sticking to the multiplicities that y'all are doing?
Yes. But then you have the psychological problem is, which one's it going to be? And then off it all goes again. I think it would be wonderful to be able to stay on top of every single literature and everything that's going on in every single literature that you translate from. If you do multiples, I'm not sure you can do that as well as you might wish. So I think maybe retracting a bit is a good idea.
I was actually curious to hear Shaun's answer to this question, because I would have put the same question to him.
Yeah.
Given, your experience, Shaun, and the range of languages you work with. I have to say, I say that I translate Italian to English, but for now it's more potentially. I haven't worked on any Italian to English literary projects yet. Yeah, so I think I'm sort of phasing which language I focus on. And right now the focus is on Francophone West African literature. And then maybe in a couple of years, I'll start focusing on Italian literature.
I don't know. I was gonna kind of like go against the grain here perhaps a little bit and say, I don't know. I think languages perhaps, I mean, if you go by the assumption that in order to be able to translate, you also have to be a little bit of an expert in the literature of that nation, and kind of like have your finger on the pulse in order to be able to know what's current and who are the trending authors and whatnot, then yes, it's a lot more difficult to do if you're translating across 2, 3, 4 languages. Having said that, if you are at peace with translating from a language that you know very well and the literature you're fairly comfortable without being, the beacon of information and the repository of knowledge, then I guess why not? And also each book is, I don't know, I find its own kind of like deep dive into a specific author's voice and the world of that novel, the historical setting, the different characters. So if, in relation to pitching, perhaps, yes, you're definitely not doing yourselves any favors if you want to be across multiple languages. But, I don't know, I would say perhaps don't let it put you off, and don't feel that you have to sacrifice the language in favor of another. Perhaps at times these things happen almost organically. You end up doing, I don't know, Shaun, certainly your publication history would say, like, you've done mountains from German and then French, but also quite a lot from Italian, and if, as you said, these are all things that came to you, perhaps as you become more known in one language market, then more people come to you. But would you, if you were to choose to devote yourself entirely to Italian and, offers kept coming from French and German, would you turn them down?
That's a very good, very, very good question. I hope if that's the decision I had made that I would have the strength to do that, yes. But that may not be something that ever happens.
I wonder, this kind of opens up a question around how do you sustain yourself, right? I know you talked about having a full-time job and doing this on the side. You're doing your writing, you're doing a lot of music management as well. Shaun, my sense is that you're translating as a full-time project. Is that correct?
Pretty much, yeah.
I wonder if each of you could talk a little bit about the question of financial sustainability. I'm going to mix it together with how is literary translation financially sustainable to you? And if it is, even if it is, right, or it isn't, what forms of institutional peer support have helped you the most, right? Some of this are grants or mentorship, residencies. Some of you have encouraged folks to join translator networks as places for support. So is it financially sustainable? If yes, great. If not, that's also fine. What are other ways in which you're sustaining yourself and receiving support for this work?
Maybe I'll go first because my answer will be short. No, it's not financially sustainable. Yeah, grants have been essential for me. So I got a grant for my first project, So Distant from My Life. I got a Penheim grant. So yeah, that sort of, gave me the confidence to say, okay, I'm not completely doing this on a limb and giving my time away for free. I got a grant for my third project too, Sarawinia. Yeah, so yeah, grants are essential.
Let's hear from Shaun to strike a note of optimism, and then I'll go last.
Yeah, I worked for a long time in television at the same time. I used to alternate working on TV programs that needed somebody who spoke either German or Italian. And I would be sent off to interview cardinals in the Vatican and that kind of thing, which was fantastic.
What a gig! How do I get that gig?
You really had the Odyssey of Odysseys.
You're the Stanley Tucci of literary translators.
And when I needed to be at home for family reasons, I translated non-literary stuff a lot as well, and some of it pays very well. And so that worked. And now I'm kind of heading towards the point where I maybe don't need to make quite so much money, so it's not a matter of enormous urgency. But luckily the books are still coming in, so there we are.
Yeah. And with that in mind, questions around copyrights and royalties, which is it's a question that I'm imprompting right now, so bear with me as I think in drafts with you. If you all could talk a little bit about those in publishing, right? Like how copyrights and royalties have sustained you, if they have sustained you. And yeah.
Okay, maybe I'll go first on that. First of all, in a brief kind of note to the previous answer, I would like to strike a bit of a balance between sugarcoating it and, pretending that it's all fine, when I've had to have a full-time job for the entire time I've been translating for 5 years. So yes, I think at the beginning it's definitely a matter of compromises and doing your creative work in the evening or weekends or both. But I also I read an essay not so long ago about an author effectively lamenting being told earlier on in her career that there was basically that the arts don't pay bills. And the gist of the essay was like, can we stop this, fearmongering, or the killing of kind of like hope among aspiring anything, artists and stuff. So I really want to say it definitely is possible. It might not be your sole source of income to begin with, but look at Shaun. He used to have to interview cardinals on top of being a translator, and these days he can get by with just being a translator. It also wildly depends on your own personal circumstances, but yes, grants, and all the grants. Look up your Italy has, I mean, we're quite lucky that we have the Italian Cultural Institute, but also don't sleep on the Swiss.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That's what paid for my summer school, I think, and also my sponsored my mentorship. Again, they have a lot of grants for translators. There's a wonderful translator association called, I'm gonna absolutely destroy the German, but Übersetzenhaus Loren. Yeah, and they have lots of residencies as well as grants and events. So I would urge you to check them out. But yes, it is possible.
Okay. There are various foundations, I think, in Switzerland that supply residencies apart from Loren.
Yeah.
So it's worth looking into all of those. Some of the residencies, which I haven't done, are actually quite glamorous and slightly daunting, but sound absolutely fantastic. So yes, those are great. And sometimes if you get those, there are added stipends that come with them and so on. Yeah. It is well worth it if you can amass over the course of a career royalties, so that March and September are months to look forward to. And it can happen. It takes a lot of books, I think, to make it happen though. Also think about pensions, by the way.
Pensions.
Yes.
Retirement, 401ks, and other things, which,
yes,
we would
take it from me.
Unfortunately, we all have to think about these things as we. Thank you for that. I want to end our conversation, which has been so delightful. Thank you all so much. With one final question, and that is, what do you wish publishers and readers understood better about the work of literary translation? I'm thinking, for example, of mostly I do translations of my own stuff, but being asked by a publisher, hey, we have a project. It's about a 200-page book. We'd love for you to translate it. We need it by the end of the month. And kind of saying, well, that's just not how it works. And so there seems sometimes to be a disconnect, right, between the work of literary translation and how it's understood by those who, by either publishers or readers who consume it. So passing it to you, what do you wish people understood better about the work that you do?
That you should be given as long a deadline as possible. There is the odd exception where a book needs to be done very, very quickly, when it might be a good idea to do it very quickly and ask for a little bit of a bonus on that one. But yes, length of time.
And I would add to that, length of time. I mean, I've been lucky that, I was always given like the right amount, or that at least I had a say in the matter in terms of, I need a couple more months. But perhaps also response time, when you then submit, and it is often months before you even hear about when you might get your comments back, or when the book is being slated for publication, or when. So a bit more consideration, I think, from publishers in terms of, and also it varies from publisher to publisher. Sometimes I've been very involved in the kind of like promotional machine, publicity, other times I, you know, been sent reviews and saying like, oh, it's, you know, or whatever, there's been a feature here and a feature there, and this is what we're planning. Other times I've had to just, you know, resort to, or sometimes I was sent reviews by my friends like, oh my God, look. And I was like, oh God, yeah, I had no idea. So I guess for me would be publishers, our work doesn't end, you know, once we submit. I think it would be good if we were at least kept abreast, or if the book has been sold, you know, elsewhere. Sometimes I've had publishers in the US who have worked with me. Sometimes I wasn't even told when the book had been sold, and then the US edition was published, and I was none the wiser, you know. And so
that's awful, that one.
Yeah, and I was like, oh God, you know, that's got my name on it, and then I wasn't involved in the editing process at all, and I was like, that's got my name on it, you know. That's a bit terrifying.
Yeah, I think Shaun and Elena have brought up very good points in terms of what publishers about the work of translators. So maybe I'll speak to what I wish readers would understand better. Yeah, I think, you know, fundamentally the job of a good translator is to make themselves invisible. And so when you do succeed, readers tend to forget all the hard work that does go into making yourself invisible, and they just assume that, you know, it's the eloquence, the humor, the expressiveness or whatever of the original author, the talent of the original author that's coming through, but it's coming through because the translator did their work well. Yeah, so just, you know, just that they remember that good translation takes work, and you tend to not notice it when it is good. You notice it when it's bad as a reader. I think as a translator, you start reading works with a different eye, but as a reader, you notice translations when they're bad. You don't notice them when they're good.
Yeah. Okay, I want to thank Yarri, Shaun, and Elena for such a beautiful conversation. Thank you for sharing a bit about your odysseys to getting here. I'd also want to thank our sponsors for this event, the Italian Cultural Institute, British Center for Literary Translation, and the National Center for Writing, and also for all the BCLT Italian-English Advanced Translation Workshop folks who joined us for this really beautiful conversation. Have a good day. I'll have a good afternoon. You have a good evening, wherever you are. So lovely to chat with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye to all.